Welcome to Backstage with Richard Ridge. Tony and Emmy Award-winning set designer Derek McLane and entertainment and fashion writer Eila Mell have a glorious new book called Designing Broadway: How Derek McLane and other acclaimed set designers create the visual world of theater. It is filled with personal sketches and photographs from the artist's archives. This stunningly designed book is truly a behind-the-scenes journey that theater fans will love. It is published by Running Press, a subsidiary of Hachette Book Group, and it is available wherever books are sold. Please welcome my guests, Derek McLane and Eila Mell. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
How are you two? First of all, how are you both and where are you both? Eila, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm great. I'm very happy to be speaking with you. And I am home in New York.
Great. And Derek, I love your books behind you. Where are you, my friend?
I'm in the library of my studio on West 38th Street.
Beautiful. Well, I have to tell you, first off, the book is absolutely stunning. I have read this cover to cover since I got it, and just going over the sketches, the photographs, the interviews. How did the two of you come together to collaborate on the book originally?
Well, I had seen a bunch of Derek shows, and, I was intrigued by this designer who could do such different designs, right? So I saw Moulin Rouge, but I had a couple of years before that, I had seen a play off Broadway called Good for Otto, where, it was a tiny little set, and it didn't even look like a set. It looked like some old room in a building that, I had been to in the 70s. So, and then I had seen American Son, and that was something different. So I just thought that he would be the perfect partner for this book. So I got in touch.
So Derek, when she called you, talk about the introduction, and did you want to do a book? I mean, did you figure out how you wanted to do this book?
Well, I was very surprised when she called. My first reaction was, I'm too young to do a book. I'm still, I'm still a student of design. I'm still learning. I'm still figuring it out, and I'm not retiring. And so I guess my first reaction was I was just not worthy of this. So we started, Eila was pretty insistent, and so we started talking about it, and it seemed to me that the only way that it made sense was if I could include some of my colleagues, some of the designers that who are also working in New York, to whom I owe so much, because and this is one thing I hope that we captured in the book, is that none of us is working in a vacuum. We are all going to see each other's shows and like them or dislike them or love them, whatever our reaction is. We are kind of working in dialogue together. We are all looking at what each other does and learning from that, and picking up ideas and saying, wow, I really think that's an interesting idea. I'm going to explore that further the next time I design a similar story, and sort of see if I can take that in a different direction. And so I think that that's how we all work. It's certainly how I work, and so it just felt important to me that for me that was a way to make it okay to do a book that was partly about my own work.
Because the interesting thing is, all set designers, you all go through the same problems together, and problem solving on a show. So I'm sure that's what I loved about the book also. I mean, you highlight some of the greatest set designers who are working alongside you now in the business. And I'm sure you learned just as much from them as they've learned from you,
Absolutely.
Throughout.
And what's great is, we're all approaching a lot of the same problems, similar stories, or sometimes the same story. I mean, sometimes we have side by side designs of the same play, and we're also dealing with some of the same practical issues, that are sort of common to various shows. But there's really an infinite number of solutions, and that's what's so interesting is, if you look at the different ways that people approach problems. I mean, one of the things I sort of enjoy is I designed a production of Company at the Kennedy Center, part of their Sondheim Festival many years ago, and I was very proud of that design. but I was also blown away by Bunny Christie's design for a company last year. And so, it seemed interesting to be able to put both of those side by side because they have nothing in common. I mean, they could not be more different. And yet, I think both worked. I know hers worked, and I think mine worked for telling the story of company. And so, I find that so interesting. The sort of people's different approaches to sometimes to the same thing.
Yeah, because back to Eila, I was wondering, what attracted you to the most to set designs? I mean, it's such an incredible world to look, because that's our eyes into a piece. When you walk into a theater, it's either a black box or it's expanded upon. And where did your love for set design as a watcher begin?
Well, it was not something that I thought about for most of my theater going career. But when I saw Boys in the Band, David Zinn's design for that, I really, really responded to that so much. And so then any show I went to after that, I really looked at the set more. And then, you spend this half hour with a set before the show starts. So you really, or at least the first set, if it's, if there are multiple sets. But so you really sort of get to look at it closely. And, I've written about design before, but never set design. And I always think it's fun to jump into something I really don't know that much about, but am interested in.
Yeah. Now let's talk about how you collaborated on the book, because like I said, the sketches, the photographs, the interviews. I mean, did you both work on this during the pandemic?
We did.
Eila did all of the interviews in the book, of which there are many. I mean, that was a huge job, and I think I did most of the selecting of the shows, but Eila definitely contributed to that as well. I mean, sometimes we would discuss what to include. I mean, it was ultimately we couldn't include everything that we wanted to include because there are so many great designs. And then there's a couple sections that are kind of, I think, clearly written sort of in my voice, like the introduction and a few little sections. But the bulk of the work really in these interviews, which Eila conducted, including interviews she did of me for the book. And then one of the parts of the book that was incredible amount of work for both of us was tracking down the photographs. I was lucky in that there's a wonderful photographer named Monique Carbone who's photographed most of my shows, and so those photographs were available. But for a lot of people, and especially for a lot of the older shows, most of the photographs that get taken of a show just show the actors. And the set is either very dark or out of focus. The photograph is taken up so close, you just don't see any of the set design. And so those weren't useful for our book. So finding photographs that showed the design for some of these was really, really a challenge.
And then in some cases, we couldn't find a photo. So luckily, Eric was able to sketch something for us.
See, that's
for example, Well, I was just going to say that for Boris Aronson's design of Follies, there were some images available, but none of them showed the one particular set from one particular scene from Follies that he had done, which I thought was so important, and we couldn't get a good photograph of it. So I just did a drawing of it based on some poor photographs that we were able to see. And so it's my drawing of Boris Aronson's design for that.
Well, I want to talk about that for a second. As you can see, Follies, the original Follies poster is behind me here. I was 11 years old, and I got to go to the Winter Garden Theater on a Wednesday night, sit in the first row of the mezzanine.
Lucky you.
And be blown away, because I went to see Yvonne DiCarlo because I knew her as Lily Munster as a kid growing up with the Munsters. And I said, I have no idea what this show is going to be like. I loved her on TV. And for an 11-year-old, I was like, I cannot wait to grow up and move to New York City and live in this world. But just looking at Boris Aronson's sets, and this is what I love about your book, because you started off with the classics. You look back at Boris Aronson. Now, is it Joe Milziner? Am I saying his name right?
No, I think it's Melziner.
Okay, beautiful. I just like to have another set designer give another name of a. I mean, you go back and you look at all these brilliant people. I mean, even Robin Wagner, who, I grew up as a kid, seeing Hair and then seeing Lenny and then seeing Superstar. And then you watched him. I mean, that's why I love that you've included all like the masters. But I want to go back for a second. Did you study with Ming Cho Lee, who is by far one of the greatest set designers ever, Derek?
I did. I went to Yale Drama School, and I had several faculty members there. Ming Cho Lee and Michael Jurgen taught scenery. Jennifer Tipton taught lighting. Jane Greenwood taught costumes. And so we studied all three things when we were there. But I always knew I wanted to be a set designer. They tried to make me into a costume designer, but to no avail. I did design costumes for a few shows when I was at Yale, but all I could ever think about is what the scenery should be. So I knew that I was not meant to be a costume designer. But Ming was, they were all incredible teachers, but Ming was singular in his personality and the strength of his voice, his passion. I never had another teacher like him ever. He was really extraordinary. And in fact, it took me several years after moving to New York to get his voice out of my head. I mean, I would literally sit down to draw and I would hear Ming speaking to me as I tried to draw.
Because what was the greatest bit of advice that he gave you during that time you were with him?
Well, it was the same advice he gave to basically to everybody, which was you had to draw it, you had to draw everything, and you had to try it, and you could never make it up. You always had to, he said it was very tempting sometimes for a director to say, oh, let's lower that thing, a couple of feet. And he said, that might in fact be the right thing to do, but he said, you need to look at it. And you need to, if you have a model, you need to lower it a couple of feet on the model and look at it. If you have a drawing, you need to lower it a couple of feet on the drawing and actually look at it, and don't wing it. Actually take the time to study it and draw it. And he said that, that was the thing, is that's what design is. Design is drawing it and studying it.
Now, Eila, for you, I mean, you look at some of these incredible interviews: John Lee Beatty, Danny Burstein, Cameron Crowe, Ethan Hawke, Moises Kaufman, Carole King, Kenny Leon, Santa LaQuasto, Kathleen Marshall, Lynn Nottage, Ruben Santiago Hudson, David Rave, Wallace Shawn, Robin Wagner, John Leguizamo. What amazed you the most about talking to these people about set design and how a director works with a set designer?
Well, so I have to say that I didn't talk to everybody about set design. So John Leguizamo didn't have anything to say about set design, but we talked about Waiting for Godot, which he did. But for the designers, it was really the most amazing part was everybody's different perspective on the same sort of process. Everybody has a different way in and just a different view, and that was so interesting to me to just hear and get to know everybody's style.
See, that's great, though, because everybody works differently. And going back to you, Derek, I mean, you work with so many amazing directors who I'm sure when you start a project might all have a different way into how they're trying to figure something out, or ask you to say, how are we going to figure this out? Now, the foreword of the book is done by Ethan Hawke, who you had worked with a few times, but especially I remember seeing A Lie in the Mind, and I was like, totally blown away by that. Talk about collaborating, with Ethan on that, and how you work together as director and set designer.
Well, that's an interesting thing you brought that one up, because Sam Shepard was very unhappy with our design and our production on that. And so that was difficult for both of us, but especially for Ethan, who had to direct the show when Sam was so unhappy with it. But Ethan's sort of directive to me at the beginning was, he said, this takes place inside a mind, inside a brain, but not a literal version of that. It's not like it should look like a brain, but it's sort of like what your image of the inside of a mind might be. And in actual fact, the show takes place in about I can't remember, 6 or 7 different locations. But he wasn't particularly concerned with that. He wanted a much more psychological space for it, and so that's really where that idea came from. And the other fact of that was that we were doing it at a little off-Broadway theater, so we did not have a huge budget. And so I ended up making it out of thousands of found objects, all this furniture, and kind of made this kind of cave-like space out of it. And it was very well received. Ben Brantley and the New York Times gave a great review. I got a lot of great reviews and got a lot of awards love, which was really nice. And it was sort of ironic because Sam Shepard was just unfortunately so unhappy with it. But life moved on, and we did other shows together. I did other shows with Sam Shepard before he passed away, which was a great privilege. And he didn't hold any grudges. It's just sort of like we disagreed on that one show, and we moved forward.
See, I'll tell you, I've seen every major production of that play in New York, and I have to tell you that your set design just blew our minds. I'm sitting in the theater, like Eila said, you sit there and you see a set when you walk into a theater, and looking at everything you had put on that set brought us into this story. So that's fascinating.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really, really great. We talked about that. Oh, Robin Wagner. So Derek, you assisted Robin Wagner on some numerous projects.
I did.
Correct with that title?
I assisted Robin shortly after I came to New York, and I ended up working there, I think for a little more than a year probably. And Robin was an incredibly generous person to work for. I was still, I was starting to design some of my own little tiny off Broadway shows. And whenever I went to Robin and said, do you think I could have a week off to go tech this show? And he would always say, absolutely, of course, that comes first. Your own work comes first. I'll take whatever I can get, of your time when you're available to come work here. He couldn't have been more generous. I mean, Robin really deserves his own book. He should have his own book because, first of all, he tells incredible stories. And he also, he designed so many important productions, things. Some of them were very, very simple. Like I think a chorus line is a great example. I mean, that was really such an iconic design, and it's really almost impossible to think about a chorus line without imagining Robin's very bold and very simple set for that. It kind of, in a large way, that kind of defined what that show was. So Robin was, he was an innovator in that way. But also Robin was, he was an innovator in terms of business and pushing to get designers to participate, in the success of a show in terms of getting a small percentage of profits. And Robin was an innovator in that way. He was the first designer to make that happen. So we all owe a huge amount to Robin for that.
See, I think that's fascinating because, Eila and I were talking before we started. You go to a show and there's so many other people who contribute to the success of a show or the show besides just the play or the music or the lyrics. It's the set designer, the costume designers, the lighting designers, the sound designers, that you all make this cake together for that finished product. You should all have a little piece of that, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. Now, Eila, for you, where did your love for theater and theater crafts all begin?
Well, so my secret is that I was an actor for 10 years as a kid. So I really grew up doing and never thinking that I wouldn't be involved in theater. So, and then by the time I was done with college, I really wanted to write. I felt like that was my thing. So I feel very fortunate to be able to write about theater.
Yeah, because like you said, what I love about the interviews that you did, it's not all just about the set design, it's about process. It's about how all these people who work in the theater have a process. I mean, was that the amazing thing for you when you conducted all these incredible interviews about how different everybody approaches their work on a show?
100%. And, it was so exciting to get these sort of behind the scenes stories of all of these iconic shows. That was really amazing.
Yeah. Now, Derek, I want to mention you have designed some incredible shows. I mean, just going through the book from, like you said, the simplest ones to the most beautifully, elegant and glorious shows. So I want to name a few of them and just tell me what comes to mind, a great story or a fun memory. Okay, we talked about Boris Aronson. The original Folly set was just unbelievable. I mean, I'm sure that was, embedded in your mind, but your version of Follies is incredible also. Favorite memory of designing the set for your production of Follies?
Just a piece of advice, maybe a request from Sondheim about the Loveland set. And he said that whatever I did for Loveland needed to be a complete world. It shouldn't be in quotation marks. The scenery should not be in quotation marks. It needed to fill the stage. And that was very useful. That was very useful advice.
Was there some, did you have Boris in the back of your head ever? I mean, like I said, Follies is one of those shows for me, which I remember everything about sitting in the Winter Garden Theater. So, I mean, just from being a designer.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I knew that it had to be, couldn't be the same. I mean, quite frankly, we didn't really have the budget either to do that. But, the other issue for us was that we went to the Marriott Marquis, which is a very modern theater. And the story, of course, takes place on the eve of the destruction of the theater. It's being torn down. And so it implies that it's a really old Broadway theater. So the Marquis was absolutely the worst possible theater that we could have gone to for that show. And so, as a result, I covered all the walls and even the ceiling of the Marriott Marquis with old gray drop cloths. I mean, they weren't expensive, but they really were meant to suggest, well, two things. One is that it was a construction site, that construction was imminent. But the other was that because they were sort of gray and there were different shades of gray, they weren't sort of, they had a sort of ancient quality to them, these drop cloths. It gave the thing a slightly ghostly quality, which I thought was kind of important for that.
You mentioned budget. You staying on Stephen Sondheim and adding James Lapine into this Into the Woods for the Fiasco Theater Company. I mean, just that maybe you had more money than I thought, but I mean, when you come to think, you probably had more money on Follies than you had to design Into the Woods. What was your favorite thing about designing that glorious set you did for Fiasco's production of Into the Woods?
Well, thank you. It was, it was working with those guys, the Fiasco company. It was founded by some people who went to college together and developed their own philosophy about how plays should be made. And they really kind of they specialize in kind of doing comedy using objects. And so they when they hired me, I never worked with them before. They said, well, we don't believe in magic in the theater. Like we don't want things to happen moved by unseen hands. We believe that the actors should do the moving of things. So if the scenery moves, it should be moved by the actors. And we want to make all the stuff of the show with objects. And we're very good at that, which they in fact were. And so I sort of, they described all that. And so then I said, well, then what do you need me for? What do you want me to do? And they said, well, we need a container to do it in because we've never really worked on a big theater on a stage before. So we need someone to design the space to put this into. And they said, we only know one thing about the show is that we're going to have a piano on stage. That's all we know. There's going to be piano. And we don't want any woods. We don't want any literal trees. We don't want any trees. So I sort of took that. And then there was an interesting thing that happened right about that time. There's an article in the New York Times about people throwing away their pianos. Nobody had room for pianos anymore. Their apartments were too small. They were dumping them. And there was this dump outside of Philadelphia with thousands of old pianos being thrown away, which is really awful to think about. But there were these photos and all you could see were like the harps of the pianos, the strings, the iron or the brass harp and the strings of the piano. And so I thought, well, that's kind of a cool thing. And what if that became, because they mentioned the piano, maybe that should become the woods. And so we got all the old piano parts and basically, I made a proscenium out of the hammers from the inside of these pianos. And we sort of made these sidewalls out of the strings of the pianos. It was really fun. It was a fun process.
So I love the way certain things unlock shows for you. I mean, I'm sure when you look at that set, it was so beautiful, but I'm like, how did he come up with the idea to do that? Then you have a discussion and you're like, old pianos, and you'll make your whole set pianos. You know, it just comes to you. Okay. The other thing, I love all the chapters. One is cast iron, which I think is fascinating with all your cast iron sets. I mean, ragtime, Gigi. Let's talk about your ragtime favorite memory of design.
Well, I struggled on that for a while, trying to figure out what to do. We started at the Kennedy Center, and I was, one thing I knew was that the director, Marcia Milgram Dodge, wanted to be able to show the sort of three groups of people in the story on in a tiered way, and so she wanted levels. And then I was rereading the script, trying to figure out what on earth I should make it, and I was struck by the presence of Stanford White in the story, the great architect who was a contemporary of that story. And I started looking at his structures, and I thought, maybe that's what this, maybe that's where this structure should come from, is as if he had designed this tiered iron structure. But in the back of my mind, and this is included in the book, was this design that had been done for My Fair Lady in London, which I never saw, but I'd seen some photos of it. And it had a kind of cast iron structure over the top of it. And I saw that and I thought, that's something so delicate. And, even though it's iron, there's something sort of delicate about and lacy about the way that metal was made. And I thought, that's an interesting idea to explore for ragtime. And so I sort of took that idea and riffed on it. They don't really look similar in the end at all, but that's sort of how I got set on that journey.
Beautiful. Now we're going to talk about Moulin Rouge, but I want to start with Eila on this, because let's talk about, Eila, when you went to see Moulin Rouge and you walked into the Hirschfeld Theater and entered the world of Moulin Rouge, like what went through your mind?
Well, I had seen photos of it, so I thought I was prepared, but photos are nothing like actually being there. So you walk in and I mean, your jaw just drops. It's just the most amazing thing. It's just so luxe and beautiful. And you just want to look close up. And, I went to the walls and I looked at the curtains and, just every bit of the theater was done. And it's just so exciting. And we actually have a gatefold in our book where you open up to that set, and it gives you a sense of what it's like to walk into the theater.
Okay, because Derek, you and I spoke about this before. I know that theater is the Martin Beck. I spent a lot of time there as a young teenager. I knew everything about that theater. I walked in there for Moulin Rouge, and Derek was there that day. He showed me the doors, the sconces, everything that he had done to that theater. So Derek, let's talk about your gorgeous set for Moulin Rouge, favorite parts of designing that epic set.
Well, I don't know if I told you this before, but originally, we did the show in Boston first at the Colonial Theater, and Alex Timbers and I had been up to see it. And when we went up to see it, the walls are all painted red, and we said, well, this is the perfect place to do Moulin Rouge. This is great. We don't really want to do that much to the auditorium because we were only in Boston for, I don't know, 7 weeks or something. So I got to work, and then a couple of months before we got to Boston, somebody called me and said, I was just up at the theater, and you do know that the walls now have green wallpaper on them. And I didn't know this, and so I was pretty alarmed. And I said, well, we can't do Moulin Rouge in a green theater. That's just not going to fly. So I said, can we paint them back to red? And they said, no, because now it's been landmarked. Not only has it been changed to green, it's now landmarked, so you can't change it. So we thought, what are we going to do? And so I thought, well, can we cover the walls with velvet? And they said, yes, you could do that. And, and so we didn't have that much time at this point because it was getting late in the day. And, we added up the number of yards that we needed to cover the walls of the Colonial Theater, and it was a lot. And we couldn't find enough yardage in any one fabric by a long shot. We couldn't even find two fabrics to make up enough yardage. It turned out I was going to need a whole bunch of them. And so I finally just said, well, let's just make a virtue of that, because we're never going to be able to match the fabrics. Let's just get a bunch of different reds. And my justification was that Harold Zidler, the impresario of, the club, the character played by Danny Burstein, that he didn't have he was going bankrupt. He didn't have enough money when he did this, so he had to sort of do it all on a shoestring. So I thought, okay, that makes sort of sense. So we ended up using 11 different types of red fabric on the wall, and I think it gives, a kind of energy to the thing, that it's not all the same, that it has a kind of bohemian feel to it. It has a little bit, even though it's subtle, it has a little bit of a handmade feel to it, and so that became the thing, and of course, then we decided we wanted to do that exact same thing on Broadway. But the Hirschfeld has a lot less detail than the Colonial. Colonial is actually quite a grand theater with, gold gilt plaster angels and all this stuff. And the Hirschfeld didn't have any of that. So the thing about doing something like a design like this is once you start, you can't stop. Like, you just have to keep going. And so, sort of one thing led to another. And so we made balcony railings for the Hirschfeld that we made 3D scans of the angels at the Colonial, and we recreated those, but we alternated them with windmills in the theater. And then I was looking at the sconces one day in the Hirschfeld and realized that they all had brass eagles on them, and brass, eagle seems like a very American thing. It did not, it didn't seem like Paris in 1899, and so we ended up covering all the brass eagles with windmills. We made a whole bunch of windmills to cover all the sconces in the theater. So it was just like, but it was a never ending process. Like, once you did one thing, you realize there was another thing you had to do. And so, fast forward a number of years, I just got back from Seoul, South Korea a couple of days ago, where we just put up, I think the first preview is tonight in South Korea for Moulin Rouge there. And we did, not quite as extensive as at the Hirschfeld, but we did a pretty big installation in the theater in Seoul.
But I just remember you walking me through, and you had covered all the doors and everything. I mean, he showed me
everything,
the windmills you showed me that day, and I was like, this is wild.
Yeah, we just couldn't stop. And even after we ran out of money, we couldn't stop. We just had to think. We kept trying to figure out cheap ways to do all that stuff.
Well, but listen, there's nothing cheap about Moulin Rouge, and like I said, when you walk into that theater, you walk through those stained glass doors, and you walk into this majestic. You just know the world you're going to be living in Paris, in Moulin Rouge. Just I have goosebumps again. Just breathtaking set. I want to talk about one of your plays, The Best Man. You use turntables, glorious production. Are turntables
Thank you.
Use, or like, that's a beautiful set?
Are they easy to use? Well, I mean, fortunately for me, somebody else has to figure out all the mechanics for that. So, I rely on really skilled technicians and scene shops to build all those things. And in this case, it was built by Hudson Scenic up in Yonkers, and they did a great job. The hard part is just doing the geometry of it all, because, so that show used 2 turntables side by side. And so you have to figure out, like, most of the time, the 2 turntables will turn and they will bring on another set. So it means you need, and I think there were 3 sets on the turntable. So you sort of have 1/3 of each, 1/6 of each set is on each turntable. So each turntable being sort of divided into 3s roughly. So it's a lot of sort of drawing and redrawing, trying to figure out how to make all that stuff line up in a satisfying way. And then the other problem is, you want to change furniture. It's really hard. Like, how do you get the furniture out into the middle of the stage between the turntables? You can't run a deck track out there. And so the solution to that really was that there was just one armchair that had to get used for everything, and all it did was turn. So it just pivoted between sets. Well, anyway, it's the kind of thing that's sort of fun to figure out. It's sort of like not really a math problem, but it's a geometry problem. And I'm not particularly good at math, but I am intuitive about those things. So like, just sort of I do it all on paper and just try to figure it out.
But see, that takes us back to Ming Cho Lee when he said drawing. Go back to drawing class, Derek.
100%. You got to draw it.
I want to talk about MJ. MJ is one of these masterful shows. Like Eila, again, you saw MJ, right? Again, you walk into the theater, you think you're in this rehearsal room, then all of a sudden you take us, Derek, to this incredible arena to watch a concert, and then we're back in the rehearsal studio again, and we're right there watching it, and we have no idea how you do it.
Yeah,
So,
well, it's how Lynn Nada wrote it. I mean, she wrote, it's most of it's memory, and so things, and it's storytelling. It's Michael Jackson telling these stories. A lot of them to the device is that there's an interviewer, sort of like you, doing interviewing him, and he's telling her stories, and you have to keep up with what she wrote, which just happens in in an instant, and so it does have to feel effortless. And one of the things that made that possible is that Chris Wheeldon is really good at having dancers and actors move things around on stage. He likes telling stories that way, and so that really helps. So really all I had to do was sort of augment, a lot of that. And we used, Peter Negrini did projections for that, and Natasha Katz lit it, and so they do a lot of that work as well in terms of, sort of the question was like, how little can we do to make this transition happen and still have the audience with us, audience understand where we are, feel where we are.
But it all starts with what you build to make all this other stuff happen in there. Like I said, I've seen MJ a few times, and I still have no idea how you can take us in a second to be rehearsing and then all of a sudden watch a music video or watch an arena and then be right back in that room again, literally with the turn of a switch. Just really, really brilliant. I want to get into a second. I Am My Own Wife was one of just a brilliant set that had so many incredible elements on it. Was that one of your most challenging sets to build, I Am My Own Wife?
Well, it was. I mean, it started, they had a couple of iterations. We did it first at About Face Theater in Chicago. About Face didn't even have their own space then. We did it, they rented a theater in Chicago. I never worked with Moises Kaufman before. And we did that really on a shoestring. But, the challenge with that is that, again, talk about fluidity of storytelling. I mean, Jefferson May, I think he played 33 characters in that, and it jumps back and forth in time between, Cold War Germany and the current day, and a whole lot of locations and a whole lot of characters. And so there was no moving scenery in that. I mean, it really was up to, it was really about creating an environment. And, the other thing is that this character, Charlotte von Mausdorf, where she was an antiques collector. And so we need, and she talks about a lot of her furniture. So we needed to figure out a way to show that, but also create a space that could become all of these other, dozens of places that needed to happen. And really, what I did was I created a structure, almost like a collage of all this information. And then it was up to the lighting designer, David Lander, to sort of tell us where to look, because if you just turned all the lights on, it just looked like chaos. And it was it was sort of organized chaos. And so, but in terms, how we sort of led our audience through that was about directing the audience's eye to very particular, very precise things at very precise moments. It was a rewarding show to do. And it was the kind of thing that I don't know that we could have done it cold on Broadway. Like, it needed those developmental steps, like we did it in Chicago, and then we did it at Playwrights Horizons, and then eventually we did it on Broadway. And each time we did it, we added a little bit more to it.
Okay, there are hundreds of set designs in this book. Beautiful, the sketches, the stories that go behind it. I know no set is easy to design, but is there one that comes to your mind that was one of the easiest ones for you to design or unlocked for you that's in the book?
It's hard to say. I mean, even there's sets that were simple, but they're never easy. I mean, one of the sets that looks the simplest in that book, I think, probably is American Son. But in fact, I think I did 11 different versions of that with Kenny Leon, sort of studying and there was a sort of a problem in the writing of that to solve, which is that, these characters are in a Miami police station and they're waiting for news, and there's two cops that come in and out, but there's nobody else ever visible. So where in a Miami police station are they? And so, like, sort of figuring that out took quite a bit of time, because they're obviously, like, they wouldn't be in the public waiting room of the Miami police station in the middle of the night, because obviously you'd see a whole lot of other people there. So, just a lot. I know that sounds like a kind of trivial thing, but figuring out the logic of that actually took a lot of sort of try. So it looks incredibly simple, but in fact, there was quite a bit of work that went into getting there.
It's funny because Eila said that was one of your favorite sets when you had seen one of Derek's shows. I mean, same thing with me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that room was so interesting because I had no idea who was going to walk through those doors or whatever. It was fascinating. Nothing is simple, but the point is, I love that you found that room, because we had no idea what was going to come about in that room during this play. The room was just as suspenseful as the story was for us. It was really breathtaking.
Well, thank you. I mean, the other thing about that play what's that?
I wanted to see what was in the other rooms.
Yeah,
right.
The other thing that was interesting about that play was it read to me like a big tragedy in terms of, what happens, and there's a kind of an inevitability about, towards the latter part of the play, there's this kind of an inevitability about the coming tragedy that I think the audience kind of all sees coming, and so. I guess I approached it a little bit like a Greek tragedy, in that it has it's sort of simple in the manner of a Greek tragedy, and also symmetrical. And somehow to me, it felt like the set for a Greek tragedy.
No, it's funny.
Even though it's an American play set in Miami.
Yeah, like Eila said, I wanted to know what was happening in these other rooms. So like, it's fascinating to like dissect that set. And the pictures are stunning in the book, but it's like you look at this set and you can see it. I love that you say Greek tragedy. Okay, what was one of the most challenging shows for you to create? I'm sure they all are, but I mean, is there one that comes to mind? Yeah. This was a monster to do or whatever.
So many are challenging. Yeah. I mean, Moulin Rouge was challenging because of the scale of it. And I think also the expectations, because the movie was so incredible. Catherine Martin, who is Baz Luhrmann's partner, is the designer for all of his movies. She designs the costumes and does production design, and she's an amazing designer. And Moulin Rouge was kind of famously a spectacular designed movie. She won I think she won 2 Academy Awards for it. And as a design student, as somebody, it's sort of one of those designer geek movies. Like all designers, sort of love Moulin Rouge, and so I felt a particular. I was thrilled to be offered that job, but I also felt a particular responsibility to live up to people's expectations for it. I didn't want to disappoint, I didn't want to disappoint myself, but I also didn't want to disappoint the fans of that movie. And so that brings a kind of extra burden on a job like that.
Well, I'll tell you, you went beyond anybody's expectations, because, I mean, the movie is breathtaking, but there is nothing more spectacular than your set design for Moulin Rouge Live. I mean, I know people who have seen that show 10, 11, 12 times. They just bring their families and friends back because you immerse us. Because of you, from the second you walk into that theater, you give us the world of Moulin Rouge, and it changes on a dime, and it's done with your beautiful, it's just spectacular. There really are not words to describe what you give an audience with that show, just so you know. Now, my final question for both of you is, what do you each hope that people take away after reading and looking through this glorious new book? Anybody can start.
Eila, you take that.
Okay. Well, I hope that they understand how much of a collaboration every design is. Nobody works alone. And also, I hope they realize that the book is absolutely about design, but it's not only about design. It really is about the community and the process. And, if set design isn't necessarily your area of interest, if you love theater at all, there's a lot. for you in this book?
Derek, for you.
Well, two things. I think one is that I hope the reader will see some of the interconnectedness of various designs and how, different designers approach things and sort of what the differences are, but also what the similarities are. Because I think that's kind of interesting. And then the other thing is, I hope that people who are not, of the theater, who happen to read this book, get a sense of how everything that they see on stage is a choice. That there's really there is nothing there on a Broadway stage when the creative team receives that theater. It's a completely blank space with no automation, no turntables, it's just a black old masonite floor and a brick wall at the back, and that's it. And so really everything you see, every piece of furniture, every costume, every light that goes on, and every piece of scenery, it's all a choice. All those things are things that as Eila said, that all involved collaboration and conversations and a whole myriad of problem solving meetings to sort of get to whatever point that people get to.
I love it.
I love that we have those stories of why these choices were made in so many cases. I think that's fascinating.
Well, I think it's great, though, because everything for the theater, it's all crafted by hand. Everything. Like you said, Derek, you walk into a theater, there's nothing but black masonite and a wall on the back. And it's like, create, make magic.
Somebody described a scene shop as a place that is perpetually doing R&D, because every single show, there's certain things, certain technologies that get repeated, but the number of times that people get called on to sort of invent something new that they haven't done before for a show is fascinating. And so these guys, these technicians who work in the shops really do amazing work at sort of figuring out how to create a new piece of machinery, for every show.
Well, I love that you said it's not just about set designing. It's about people finding out that there's so many other people that work together to make magic in the theater. And that if you don't have it to be a set designer, you may want to be a stage manager or a lighting designer or a costume designer or a beater or, make hats. I mean, or shoes or dye clothes. There's so many, like I said, it's all handcrafted that makes that magic when an audience walks into a theater and sits down and then the lights go out and you all take us on a journey somewhere. So first of all, once again, Tony and Emmy Award winning set designer Derek McLane and entertainment and fashion writer Eila Mell have a stunning new book called Designing Broadway: How Derek McLane and Other Acclaimed Set Designers Create the Visual World of Theater. It is available anywhere books are sold. And listen, I could talk to you two forever. Derek, I've known you for a long time, my friend. And this was really special.
Yes, we haven't known each other a while.
And Eila, getting to know you today, this is really special. I cannot wait to talk to you about your next book that you're working on. But
thank you. This was wonderful.
Happy holidays to everybody watching. And like I said, if you want a holiday gift to bring somebody or give somebody, think of this one. It's so beautifully designed. I wish I could just show people just what's in this book, but it's so stunning. The color plates, the design, it's a beautiful coffee table book about how people make magic in the theater. Listen, you two, have a beautiful holiday. And for everybody watching, look no further than Broadway World, and we'll all see you at the theater. Take care, everyone.